All right, athletes, so let's talk about one of the most incredible exercises for building full body strength, right? And there's a few of them that are out there. Like if I was tasked, and this is what I do for a living, but if I'm tasked to give someone the most amount of full body strength that I can possibly give them in the shortest amount of time, there are a few exercises that I would immediately go to, and one of them is a squat. And in order to build someone's strength in a squat, the first thing that we need to do before we add any sort of weight to someone's squat, right, is we need to make sure that you know how to squat. And what I find when I go into most gyms, I see a lot of guys squatting because a lot of guys understand this. Like they understand the value of it. They know they need to do it. They don't like to do it all the time, but they know they need to do it. So you see guys squatting, but most of them are very, very poor squatters. And who am I to judge other people squatting? Because I'm not like a world record holder of the squat. Like I don't have any of these, I'm not the world's strongest man. I don't have a 1,000-pound squat. In fact, I'd consider myself from a weight standpoint to be a very, I guess maybe above average, but not any sort of elite level squatter. So what makes me like an authority in this? Well, here's the deal. I've been obsessed with human performance for it's almost been 25 years. And I've worked at some of the highest levels of fitness. Namely, I've developed athletes that went and competed at the CrossFit Games and also in the sport of USA weightlifting, where we do a ton of squatting, right? So think like Team USA athletes. These are the kinds of people that I've worked with, that I've developed. So I just have this really crazy understanding of biomechanics and how the human body should move, right? How we can really create a beautiful moving system. And when we can get a really beautiful moving system meaning your body, we can develop someone's strength and power above and beyond what you ever thought even possible, right? So let's get into this. So what does it take to get a great squat? And let me start with what are some of the mistakes guys are making, because I think we need to like shine a light on the mistakes, and then we can give you a little bit of insight on how to potentially make that a little bit better. And I'm gonna go through 3 things. I could do like a 4-hour video on this, but I'll spare you, okay? So let's talk about the 3 primary things that we look at. And number 1 is you can't control spine pelvis, okay? Spine pelvis, right? And the spine pelvis, we've got this beautiful shape of the spine, and then there's the pelvis, right? And then your head sits on top, and then you've got this hip joint where your legs are, right, down below, okay? So what does it mean to not be able to control the spine and pelvis? Well, here's the deal. When I see people squatting, when I go in the gym and I see them squat down, first of all, before they squat down, when they're standing up nice and tall, they're in a pretty good posture position, right? That's kind of the easy part. When we're standing up, we can create a neutral spine and pelvis. And for example, just me standing here right now, I'm in a neutral spine and pelvis, okay? And a neutral spine and pelvis is the strongest, most stable position for your spine, okay? So now the challenge becomes, it's easy to do this when I'm just standing up talking, right? Or if I'm gonna go for a walk, when I'm nice and vertical, it's easy. When I start to break at the hip and the knee, break just means bend. When I start to bend at the hip and the knee, for a lot of folks, they can't maintain a neutral spine and pelvis. So if you think about a squat, the squat needs to occur in the hip and the knee and also the ankle. These are the joints that are going to be moving, okay? In a traditional, we'll say back squat, right? This is where we're getting our movement from. There should be 0 movement in the spine and the pelvis. Maybe a little bit at the neck. If you keep the eyeballs forward, there's even a little bit of debate there. I recommend an eyeball forward, so there will be a little bit of movement in cervical, but the cervical is not being loaded. Everything below cervical is being loaded, so we can move that. But everything that's loaded, which is all of this stuff, this structure right here, this spine and pelvis, that needs to stay neutral. And what do I see most often when I go into a gym and I see someone squatting? And this is a bit of an exaggeration, okay? This is a bit of an exaggeration, but I just want to do this just to, we'll say they're doing a back squat, right? So the bar is right there, and then they're in this low position of the squat. We'll just say most people can't even really get into a low position of the squat. So it'll look, it actually doesn't look like that. It looks like this. Oh, I'm having a hard time drawing this here today. It's usually something like that. There we go. That's better. Can you see that okay? Yeah. So the spine goes into this rounded position. It's no longer neutral, right? There's some normal natural curves here, which I didn't draw here, but we lose that neutral position of the spine. And we've even got a name for this kind of in the world of strength conditioning. We call it pooping dog, right? So I know not very appealing, right? But you can see that, like when somebody squats down, we can see that spine starts to round. And the problem is when the spine starts to round like this is we put some uneven pressure on the discs of the spine, right? Because the spine it's a stack of like bone, disc, bone, disc, bone, disc. And in order to maintain even levels of pressure on those discs, we need to maintain neutral, right? So when I see somebody doing this, a couple things. Core strength is lacking, right? Core strength is your ability to maintain a neutral spine and pelvis as you create different movements in your extremities. In this case, we're talking hips, knees, and ankles, right? So if you don't have good core strength, that spine and pelvis is going to give. Okay, so we have to improve your core strength. And it's not just doing a bunch of sit-ups and back extensions. You have to learn how to keep that spine organized. You have to learn good movements. You have to learn how to disassociate spine and pelvis from hips, knees, and ankles, right? And there's a process that we take people through so that they can learn how to do this really, really well. So they can learn how to maintain a neutral spine as they create their movement. And the cool thing is when you can get into, I'm going to draw a good squat here, which is what I normally draw, right? It's not even that good. It's going to look something like that, right? Imagine it's a back squat. Imagine you got the bar here, right? That bar has to be right over the middle of the foot. So this would be a beautiful back squat position, right? So the spine is neutral, not pooping dog, okay? All right, so get control of your spine. Super, super important, okay? So let's talk about number 2. What is the second biggest mistake I see people do in the squat? Well, number 2 is you think, let's just say this, you don't squat low enough, okay? And we've been taught over the years, if you've been in the fitness industry for a while, and when I say industry, like maybe you've been going to a gym for a long time, or you've been doing, you've got some exposure from back when you were an athlete back in the day, whatever, you probably heard something like, well, we don't want to squat down too low. If you squat down too low, it's bad for the knees, it's bad for the hips, it's bad for the back, it's bad for everything, right? Basically, if you squat down too low, you're going to blow yourself up, right? This was kind of the narrative that we had been taught way back in the days. But now we know better, right? We know better. We can create these ranges of motion. Our body's designed to create these angles. Our hips, our knees, our ankles, there's nothing wrong with getting into these positions, right? This is the same sort of thing I drew before, right? But this is a full range of motion squat. What does it mean to have full range of motion squat? We've got the hips down below the knees, right? And you're centered and balanced over your foot, which we'll talk about in a little bit, right? And then also, of course, notice that the spine is nice and neutral. So what most people do is they squat down to somewhere like this. Like that. Right? So it looks something like this. So they get down to parallel, and then they're like, okay, this is good. Most people don't even make it to parallel. Quite honestly, they think they make it to parallel, but they really don't. So they get down to parallel, and then they stand themselves back up because it's better for your knees, right? And I blame powerlifting a little bit. Powerlifting, when you're a competitive powerlifter, their standard is you only have to go to parallel. So I get it. Like if you're a powerlifter, this is how you're going to train. It's going to be a little bit different, right? But if you're training for general fitness, we want to utilize the ranges of motion of those joints, the full range of motion, because if you don't use it, you lose it, right? If you don't practice those ranges, if you don't practice getting your hip into full hip flexion, and you don't practice getting your knee into full knee flexion, and your ankle into full dorsiflexion, if you don't practice those things, they go away. and then you get tighter and tighter, and it's harder to get up from the floor. When you have to access those ranges, your body doesn't know what to do with it, right? It just, things crumble, things fall apart. It's one of the reasons we see the spine round as you go down these low positions, right? Your body just doesn't know how to coordinate itself, right? It's never been taught that, right? So you don't squat low enough. So why don't you squat low enough? What is going on? Number one could just be that you've been taught that way, right? You're a little fearful from going too low. Maybe you've had some pain. Maybe you've had a bad experience with squatting low before, right? And which could be the case. But again, if you're doing it wrong, the chances of you having some sort of an injury in a squat or any movement for that matter where you're loading the system, if you do it improperly, the chances of you hurting yourself are pretty significant depending on the weight that you're using, right? And a lot of guys like to go heavy with not great technique, right? So maybe you've played around, maybe you've practiced before, but I can almost guarantee you, you're probably not doing it correctly. And there's a way to learn how to access these ranges of motion. So you're probably maybe thinking like, well, look, Tone, I get what you're saying, but I'm a really tight dude. Like, I'm just so tight. My hips are tight, my knees are tight. I'm like, okay, that's fair. But here's a test that you can use on yourself to determine if you're really tight. Because I find that most guys that claim to be too tight to be able to utilize the full range of motion in the lower body, most of those guys, it's more of a skill thing than it is a true tightness issue. It's not a flexibility issue, it's a skill issue. So here's a way to find out if you just don't know how to do it, like if it's really truly a skill thing, or if it's truly a flexibility thing. Take a low bench, okay? Take a low bench, something that's not quite knee height, a little bit lower than knee height, right? So you find a bench. What we used to do in the gym, when I used to teach people how to squat in the gym, is we would use a medicine ball, kind of a big cushy medicine ball we would use, but you could just use a bench, right? Just something short, like a short stool or something, right? Again, lower than your knees, and you're just gonna sit down. You're gonna sit your butt on that bench, right? Like so. Hopefully you can see this. Your feet are gonna be down, like so, right? You're just gonna be kind of hanging out, just chilling. Hopefully you can see that. Pull this in a little bit, right? So you're gonna sit down, and what I want you to do when you're in that bottom position is I want you to get a really good posture, okay? So you're sitting down, and I want you to really organize your spine, right? Just sit nice and tall, right? You don't have to, not this, right? Just sit neutral spine, okay? And once you've got that, if you can go neutral spine here, that's a really good sign, right? That's a really good sign that, okay, you can access full hip flexion while maintaining neutral spine. That's a really, really good sign, right? That means we can use that in the squat, right? We just have to teach you how to do it. Like if I were to slide that thing out of there, can you maintain that? But there's a little bit more to this, right? So this is where you're gonna first go. But obviously if I slide that thing out from you now, you're gonna fall backwards, right? Because your feet are way out here and most of your weight is way back here, right? So we gotta get your feet under you. I call it getting your feet under you, right? So what we need to do is and this was the beauty of having a medicine ball, is we're gonna slide the feet back so they're here, okay? So hopefully you can see that, right? You slide the feet back, so now the middle of the foot would be over your shoulder. You're still maintaining neutral spine, you still got full hip flexion, but now we added in more knee flexion, and we added in a little bit more dorsiflexion, because the more you pull that heel back, the more you're gonna have to access this range of motion of the ankle as well. If you can sit in that spot, if you can sit there with a neutral spine, feet flat on the floor, hips below the knees, right? Then you have adequate range of motion. You do not have a flexibility issue, you have a skill issue. And I'm gonna say, like I've been doing this for a very long time. I've been teaching people how to squat. Like I've taught more people how to squat than probably anybody on this planet. We can teach you how to access this. We can teach you how to use this, right? But you need the right instruction. And if you can learn it, if you can get this, if we can pull this out of here and you can recreate that position, then we can start to develop your strength, right? So we do a bunch of air squats first, right? Just body weight and gravity, and we practice that, and we practice that, and we practice that, and we develop that skill until you're just so good at it And it's like, okay, guess what? Now we're going to bring a barbell into this, or maybe some dumbbells or whatever. It just depends, right? And we're going to progress and progress and progress. And next thing you know, we got 65-year-old guys squatting close to 300 pounds safely, right? Safely, without blowing themselves up, right? It can be done. All right, I had a call come in, so hopefully, let's just pick up. So hopefully you can practice this. If you think that you're tight, practice this, because this, in essence, if we take this away, there's your squat, right? That's your squat. That's what we're trying to chase. So practice it. I always teach bottom up first, and then we go top down. Bottom up just means we start in a seated position, okay? All right, so let's talk about the third thing. Number three is you have no control of your base. You have no control of your base. What the heck does that mean, right? So the base, the base of your system is your feet, right? So you got these two beautiful feet at the bottom of your legs, right? And that is your connection to the ground, right? And we've been taught over the years that when we squat or deadlift or all kinds of things, when we're standing and we're doing some of these movements, to sit back on the heels, right? This is like the most common mistake I see people do. Like they're squatting down and they're like balancing on their heels. Their toes are kind of coming up, because a lot of trainers back in the day used to say, wiggle your toes, right? So they're kind of balancing on their heels as they're squatting down. They got 200 pounds on the bar and they're unstable, right? You've got this beautiful platform of a foot. You need the entire platform of that foot. Let me rephrase that, not the entire platform, but the foot is like a tripod. So treat it as a tripod. And imagine with a tripod, of course, there's 3 points of contact that you want on the ground. Those 3 points are going to be the ball of your foot, the outside of your foot, and the heel of your foot. So those are the 3 sections of your foot that we want anchored to the floor, okay? And it's really easy to do. In fact, your body just naturally does it when you're standing up, right? As I'm standing here speaking to you right now, I'm anchored, I'm grounded, right? Those are the connections that I have to the floor, right? The arch of the foot is there very, very nicely, right? I've got some space between the arch of the foot and the floor, right? So we want, again, let me say it one more time, 3 points of contact, write this down. Heel of the foot, outside of the foot, ball of the foot. Those are the 3 sections you want on the floor. And that goes for the entire squat. As you squat down, as you stand back up. If you feel yourself moving around, if you feel your weight shifting on the feet, it means you're very inefficient and likely very unstable. When you're unstable, your risk of injury goes up. When you're inefficient, not only does your risk of injury potentially go up, but when you're inefficient, you can't build any strength, at least not very quickly. It's going to be very slow going, and you're going to be very limited as to how far you can push those levels, right? Efficiency is critical for performance, right? So we want efficiency, and we of course want safety, right? We want both of those things. So your base is important. So think about when you're squatting, keep the tripod anchored, right? Stay anchored, okay? Don't go to heels. There's a time and a place for heels. If you're the kind of person that's always coming up on the toes, then there might be a time and a place for that cue to kind of sit back just a little bit. But remember, the goal is to make the tripod connected to the ground during the whole range of motion, because that just creates more stability through the system. When you've got that rooted feeling, that anchored feeling, everything works better up top, okay? So there it is. Those are the 3 things that you need to really focus on in order to make your squat exceptional, right? Number 1 is make sure that, drawing a blank, make sure that your spine and pelvis is neutral, right? That you can maintain a neutral spine and pelvis. Number 2, it might not be your flexibility. In most cases, it's not. It could just be your skill, right? And I gave you a simple way to kind of train that skill a little bit. Start from the bottom and work up. And then number 3, think about your feet. Make sure that you stay anchored at the feet as you practice your squats. And if you'd like help, if you'd like a professional to actually watch you squat, and kind of beat it up a little bit, triage it and beat it up and teach you the most efficient way to learn this thing, right? This is exactly what we do in Athletic After 40. So if you're interested in learning this, set up a call. We'd happy to be, happy to learn a little bit more, to chat about this, to learn a little bit more about you and show you how we can help you to develop not just this movement, but lots of different movements that are going to help to make you the strongest, fittest version of yourself, right? And we'll also get into nutrition, into recovery, basically everything that it takes. We've got systems around all of those things to make you the absolute best version of yourself as a guy over the age of 40, right? So if you love living an active life and you want to stay strong, you want to stay fit, which you should, then this is the program designed specifically for you. So reach out, set up a time, and let's rock and roll, man. Let's go. Clock is ticking, baby.